And I see 5 attendees at the moment, 7 attendees. They're starting to pile in.
Good evening, everybody who's started to pile in here already. We're just waiting for the group to gather, probably be starting in about 3 to 5 minutes.
I'm opening up more co-hosts. Maybe that'll give everybody what they were looking for. Everybody on beta is now a co-host.
Okay, so looks like Andrew Pichet has access with 4 questions. So him or Jeff, one of on those.
So Andrew P, you're going to take care of it?
I will. Yeah, thanks, Dan.
We are recording on Zoom. We're at 19 out of a possible 33 at the moment. We are holding at 20 attendees at the moment. We are at 6:40 with 21 attendees online already.
You want to wait another minute or so, Gene?
Yeah, that would be it. I think we can get started and people can join.
Okay.
All right. If you guys are ready to go, I'll count you down.
You got to start, Gene.
5.
Yes.
You guys all set? Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll go live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 3rd public hearing on our downtown improvement master plan. Similar to the first 2 public hearings, if you attended, I am going to turn the presentation over to Randy Collins from the Beta team, and he will walk you through the conceptual plan that has come out of essentially comments and questions related to the first 2 public hearings. So Randy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gene. Good evening, everybody. As Gene said, this is the 3rd public meeting. I'd like to start things off by giving you a little introduction to the team itself. There's Gene Enright, who was the planning director that just speaking. Also with our team is Andrew Shapiro. He's the director of community and economic development. Daniel Beckley, he's a planner in Gene's office. We have Brian Fraser, who's from North Andover CAM, the technical person behind all this. My name again is Randy Collins, landscape architect and project manager for the Beta Group. With me from my side is Jeff Maxtudis. He's going to moderate the chat, and I'm going to tell you a little more about that in just a second. Andrew Pichette, he is going to be launching some polls, and I will also tell you a little more about that in just a minute. And Charlie Cray, he's technical support. I'll point the technical support out right now from between Charlie and Brian is if you are having any problems, then you'll need to contact them, and I will give you that information in just a second. Oops, went the wrong way. So as Gene said, this is the third of the public meetings that we've had for the project. I'd like to go over a few things for tonight. This is being recorded and will be available on the town's project website. The address is on the screen. I'm going to briefly summarize the first two public meetings, and then I'm going to get into a discussion on the preferred concept for the downtown. As I said, this will include polling questions during the course of the beginning of the presentation. And we'll also give you opportunities to ask questions throughout the presentation using the chat feature. If you're having any problems with the chat feature, one of the members of the tech team will help you out. Simply just press the chat icon and in the to field, type in tech team and send them a message and they can help you out. The group, the participants will be muted throughout the presentation. So feel free to make comments that you'd like and we won't hear you. If you want to ask a question, again, use the chat icon for asking those questions. Jeff's going to moderate the questions as they come in. We probably won't be able to answer every single question, but what Jeff is going to do is look at sort of the trend of the questions and be able to distill them down so that we can answer as wide a variety of questions as possible. So we're going to ask some poll questions. All you have to do is simply click the choose and response in the pop-up window and hit submit. And if you're not seeing the polling questions, we do have a survey that we can link you with. Just send a chat message and we can link you to that as a survey at SurveyMonkey. This meeting is being televised and it's going to be on the different broadcasts that you can see at the bottom of the screen: GovCam, Comcast 8, and Verizon 26. Again, this will be recorded, so you can always refer back to it or have a friend look at it sometime in the future. So just to practice the polling questions, this is really not anything more than a practice question, but if you could give us your response on what is your favorite meal.
Just about everyone has responded, and almost everyone. There's no clear favorite. A lot of people like a lot of different meals. So I guess dinner is the highest. So that's just an icebreaker to get people familiar with the polling and the results. So.
So the next one, we've got a couple of polling questions to start off. The next one is getting to know a little bit about you.
This is just to see who's in, what our audience is for tonight. And almost everyone, just a couple people are almost there. And we're there. We have an experienced audience tonight. We don't have anyone between anyone younger than 30. So everyone 31 to over 60. So you got an experienced crew tonight.
And the next polling question is getting to understand how often you visit the downtown.
You may remember, if those of you who were on the last forum, public forum, we asked this also just to get a sense of how often people visit the area. And we have a mix, but almost half of you visit at least a few times a week. So that's good. We have active participants here tonight.
And that it was 47% at the last public meeting for that same choice, a few times a week.
Good.
And this is the final polling question.
All right. Yeah, 13 of you attended, but we also have 7 or 8 new folks. So that's great. It's not too late to
Excellent.
participate and hear your opinions. Thank you.
So the final question is really being able to test the chat feature. So we want to make sure that you're able to send us a chat, and we may ask some questions through the course of this, or you may have a question to utilize the chat feature. So we throw this question out again, sort of as an icebreaker on will the Red Sox make the playoffs this year? Just want to make sure that everybody's chat feature is working before we get started.
I could see we didn't ask if they'd win the World Series. That might be too optimistic, but yeah, this was good.
Seems to be working all right, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm seeing a good mix of people who have faith and people who say no. Yeah, so I think the chat is working fine. If you have a
All right, excellent.
if you have a problem, let us know. But use the chat feature rather than the Q&A. That'll help us. I see one person use the Q&A, so let's make sure you use the chat feature. I'll be monitoring that.
So I just want to give a brief overview of the last 2 meetings. The first was a public meeting that was in person back in January. And really the goal of that meeting was to give the participants an understanding of how we've come to understand through our research and experience in the downtown a number of different components that are on the screen that we typically be looking at for doing a downtown project. But we also wanted to hear from the participants what they thought of these different areas, subject matter areas, so that we can get an understanding of how you, the users, think of your downtown. The second meeting that was back in December was the first of the virtual meetings. It was really a meeting to look at a couple of options that were ideas that we generated based on input that we received and based on looking at the downtown and coming up with ways to make improvements. I think it's important to say at this point, one of the things that we're trying to accomplish with the project is to generally provide a renewed streetscape for the downtown and also to make better connectivity to the downtown. And this is from the surrounding neighborhoods as well as from the Mills area. So there were 2 general options that were presented that focused on the right in the core of the downtown. Parallel parking was one option, or angled parking was the other option. The way things turned out, people preferred the parallel parking option as opposed to the angled parking option, and that's what we're going to be forwarding through in this presentation. So here's our project study area, and here is the concept plan. I'm going to give you an overview of the core area of the downtown. This is the angled parking concept, and basically the angled parking concept is when you do a on-street parking count between Waverly and Water, you find that there are 54 existing spaces, and this concept results in a loss of 4 spaces down to 50 spaces. And so this is something that I want to be able to walk through you with a little more detail as we look at the entire downtown study area. So this is right in the core of the downtown at Town Hall. That red line that you see going across the roadway is going to be where we are going to show some renderings of what the downtown could look like. The other thing that I want to point out is just a general orientation to the plans. And you can see that in the legend. So the green circles are generally proposed trees. The yellowish bright areas with a dark spot are ornamental lights. Brick banding was in the sidewalk area. And that's an important point to point out. We did have some questions at the last meeting about brick sidewalks versus non-brick sidewalks or having a brick band. And it was the preference of the group at that time to be able to have a brick band as opposed to the sidewalks being entirely brick. There are crosswalks. You can see those on this graphic as well. But the other thing to point out is the existing curb line. And the existing curb line is a red dashed line. So in some areas, it's very different from the proposed curb line. So in the area across the street from Town Hall, you can see the red brick, the red dashed line right at this location that shows the existing curb line location. Take her out. Excuse me while we take care of the dog. Sorry about that. Anyways, the beauties of doing virtual public meetings. So I was saying about the red dash line is the current curb line. So in this image, what you can see is to the right of where the text says Main Street, some neck downs where the sidewalk area is extended into the road area, similar to what you have currently across from Town Hall, but we're using that more extensively for both a pedestrian enhancements and also a traffic calming technique. And I'm going to point out something about the traffic calming technique in just a second. So,
Randy, let me interrupt just for a second.
sure.
Just one comment on Waverly Street when we get there, when we get down to Waverly. And then someone commented they do like the brick banding.
Okay, just do me a favor and remind me of that comment when we get there. Okay, I just had to.
I will, yeah.
Thank you. Anyway, so I've got to get my PowerPoint screen back up. Anyway, so moving forward to the next slide. This is the cross section of what the roadway width in relation to the sidewalk widths are currently between Town Hall and Boston Chowder. The roadway width is about 48 feet. The travel lanes are about 16 feet with 8 feet parking lanes. Under the proposed condition, the at least in this small segment in front of Town Hall, the parking, parallel parking across the street from Town Hall is taken out, and we're able to add into the sidewalk area, make that area about 21 feet and have a 7-foot sidewalk and still maintain parking on the Town Hall side. So one of the things to point out is that the travel lane width goes from 16 feet to 13 feet 6 inches, which for a downtown area is a relatively generous width for a travel lane. I will say that this is about the only section, a small section of downtown around the Town Hall from about Water heading towards Waverly, where there's a 13-foot 6 travel lane. But the travel lane never gets any narrower than 11 feet, which is a very common travel lane width for downtown areas.
Hey, Randy, we have one question come in asking, will the trees be precluded by the utility lines?
Well, I'm going to touch on that in just a second. So I wanted to give you a rendering depicting what it is exactly that we're talking about. And this is looking to the north, generally speaking, along Main Street with the Town Hall on the right-hand side. Here is proposed condition. Generally, I would say that we would still try to find a way to use street trees, even if the utilities are there. It just limits the tree selection. You're going to notice that all of the renderings that we're going to show tonight show a with utility and without utility condition. And we've always shown the trees within there, whether they're with the utilities or without. They don't really get into whether it's a vase shaped tree, which is something that you might use with utility lines, versus a more upright or a straight central leader tree, which is something that you would be probably leaning towards for tree selection without utilities. So this is an example of what it looks like under the proposed condition. And just to give you a reminder, the existing condition, proposed, and proposed without utilities.
Randy, can I ask a couple more questions?
Sure.
There's one comment and someone says that it looks very good without overhead lines. And the other question is there a reason we aren't going to put utilities underground?
There is not a reason. We've been, as part of this process, talking to the town about the utilities, and it's been a subject for all of the public meetings that we've had. I think the way to characterize it currently is that the town is still looking at putting the utilities underground. There's funding issues that go along with it. But anything that we do would be able to, if we build in the right infrastructure, be able to accommodate undergrounding utilities in the future. So what I mean by that is we could put in duct banks and some vaults in the sidewalk during the construction of the streetscape that would accommodate the future of the undergrounding. It's a decision, final decision has yet to be made. And again, this is just a master plan. So we're really talking about preliminary ideas. No matter how the project moves forward, the undergrounding of the utilities needs to walk hand in hand with the streetscape development plans so that the right decisions can be made when it comes time to implement the design.
Hey, Randy,
So-
can I just make one more comment from the town's perspective on that issue?
Sure.
So, and I think it's a great question, and obviously the utility undergrounding would be a great addition to the project, and I agree with all the comments regarding it looking great if we can get them undergrounded. I just, to Randy's point, we're still evaluating it. No final decisions have been made. I think more discussions need to be had with downtown stakeholders, property owners and business owners, as well as with town hall officials, town management, as well as, of course, the select board. We do have our town engineer, John Borgese, on the meeting tonight. We've had conversations with our DPW and engineering departments, looking at it. And this is obviously, these numbers are sort of estimated at this point, and there's a lot more evaluation that has to be done. But undergrounding of utilities could cost between $4 and $6 million. And that's not including design funding that would be required to design the actual project. And then you're looking at an 8 to 10 year build out start to finish. So when you consider the fact that, we had a recession not long ago, we had the Columbia gas issue, now we have COVID-19, there's been a lot of pressure, I would say, to put it mildly, on the downtown business community. So we just want to make sure that if we're going to carry out a project for an 8 to 10 year build out for that amount of money, that we evaluate all ends of it. So there'll be more discussion on this, and we'll just continue to evaluate what the best path forward is.
Thanks, Andrew.
Randy, can I ask a few more questions?
Of course.
Given the parking demand at Town Hall, an 8-foot wide parking lane would be preferable.
Yes, I think we would be proposing, I'm going to go back to the cross section. I see where the question comes from. We have a 7'6". We could probably fit an 8-foot wide parking lane into this, under this cross section.
Yeah.
I don't see that as being an issue.
And then related to that, saying that the 13.5-foot travel lanes are generous. The comment is 12-foot lanes are more than sufficient. Was there any consideration of a dedicated bike lane for this?
It's interesting that you asked that question. The 13'6" lane actually allows us to have bikes within the downtown. This wouldn't be a dedicated bike lane, but it would be more of a share-o approach to accommodating bikes within the downtown area. I think that the roadway width and the right-of-way width, considering all of the different users, from the bicyclists to people in the automobile coming to and from the downtown, deliveries, as well as pedestrians. I think if you try to find the balance point of all of those needs, you probably come up with something more in line with a Sharrow as opposed to a dedicated bike lane in either direction.
One more, Randy. Will any existing trees have to be removed?
We did an evaluation of all of the street trees out along the corridors that we're going to be talking about. And maybe, I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know, but there really aren't that many street trees within the corridor right of way. There are trees that are along the back of the sidewalk area. And for the most part, I don't see any reason why those trees would not be able to stay. They certainly would need to be cared for during the course of construction when we get to that point. But there really isn't that many street trees within the corridors that we've been studying.
And just one more, and then we'll let you continue. With the senior center moving, how will current space be reallocated? Also, will sidewalks and roadway be improved from the senior center to downtown?
That I would have to maybe kick over to the town. But I will say this, one of the considerations, and we're going to touch on it a little later in the presentation, is that connectivity, wherein some ideas that we're considering about connectivity. So that connection between Main Street adjacent to the town hall that goes back behind the town hall is certainly something that would be envisioned as being improved as part of this project.
In regards to
Randy?
the, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jane.
Oh, I'm sorry. Andrew, you can certainly, if you know more than I, absolutely step in. But as far as I'm aware, the space has not been allocated for the former senior center space. So there's been discussions internally as to what may be repositioned there, but no decision's been made as far as I'm aware. As far as the sidewalk connectivity, there is a plan in place to construct a sidewalk from the Route 125 intersection with Sutton Street to along the frontage of the new senior center. So that would bring it to Surrey Drive. We've had internal conversations regarding grant funding that potentially could then bring it along McAvoy Field all the way to the intersection of High Street, but that funding has not been secured yet. So the plan is a construction of a sidewalk from the intersection of Sutton Street and Route 125 to the Surrey Drive intersection with Sutton Street.
Thank you, Jane.
Randy, one more just came in asking about signage, that in the old center, there was a complaint that there were too many signs being used. And how can we avoid or minimize the use of safety signs like crosswalks at these streets?
As part of a typical streetscape project, when we get to the point of putting together the documents that would be used to construct it, we would do a detailed evaluation of the signs and make sure that they meet the current standards and be able to take out any redundant signs. So I think that's a short way of saying that would be certainly a part of how we would move a project like that forward. So we're going to continue moving towards Sutton Street on the downtown area. We're going to go in the other direction once we get to Sutton Street, but heading towards Waverly and Sutton Street. Here's what the proposed plan looks like. The roadway in this area starts to narrow a little bit. The intersections locations provide great places for pedestrian neck downs and improvements. So you can see that sort of at the First Street intersection. You can see the same sort of approach with trees and lights, the brick banding and the sidewalks. All of these would be new features within as part of the streetscape project. And this is what it would look like, or I should say, this is what it looks like today in front of this Broad Street School redevelopment. Here's what it could look like, and without utilities. Continuing towards Waverly in Maine. Actually, I'm going to sort of do a deviation and take a view that's looking at the Waverly Maine intersection. And we've got a cross section here that we want to look at, but I want to draw your attention to the red dash that delineates the edge of the roadway. So this is the edge of the roadway as it exists today. And what we're proposing is to tee the intersection up, Waverly up with Main Street, making it a more conventional intersection. We're going to make sure that we continue to provide the parking, which is in the wider curb cut area, and also provide access to the house that is right below the word street and Main Street. We're hoping that this does a number of different things. Again, going back to the connectivity and making pedestrian improvements, is making a safer crosswalk at the Waverly Main Street intersection. We're going to maintain, under the proposed plan, maintain the parking as it mostly exists. It's maybe a little bit narrower than it is today, and maintain access to the house whose driveway actually goes out into Waverly Street, and now will be going out to Main Street as part of this proposed plan. You can also see a couple of neck downs helping to reduce the length, the crossing distance of the pedestrian in the crosswalk as part of the overall proposed changes to the intersection of Main and Waverly.
Hey, Randy, let's get back to the earlier question about Waverly. There was a comment about, oh no right turn lane from Waverly onto Main.
No, there isn't. And one of the things that we've done is we've also done traffic counts in this area. So we've looked at through movements and turning movements at all the intersections to look at what kinds of impacts any of these proposed changes might have on the traffic movements themselves. I don't believe this would fall under a warrant for a traffic signal at this intersection, Jeff. But one of the things that we're trying to do is find that balance point between keeping vehicular circulation going and not tying it up, but also making pedestrian improvements. Introducing a lane here would have, a turn lane would have a pretty big impact on existing on-street parking, because the lane itself is, adding another 11 feet to the roadway. But one of the things that also has to be considered is the transition into that lane. So if you had a turn lane that could accommodate 2 to 3 cars, it's about somewhat of an equal distance that you'd have to go with the transition into that. So with any impacts, the point being, any impacts to on-street parking wouldn't be just the turn lane, but it would also be the transition into that turn lane. So that would have a relatively significant impact on parking. And the counts that we took when we were doing the designs didn't show, it showed that there was certainly a need for people turning on that, but to have it a signalized intersection or eking out a turn lane, the counts didn't play that out.
So I got there's a few comments coming in. There's a statement that when the train goes through, it's already a nightmare. There is already a right turn. It's an existing lane, not an introduction of a new lane. And there was a question, were traffic counts done COVID or before? On weeknights during non-COVID times, the traffic backs up on Waverly as cars are trying to turn left or right onto Main. We did do traffic counts pre-COVID and observations, so we did notice that. There is queuing at this T intersection, particularly for left turns. There was a comment, Randy, about will the center median on Waverly Street, will that be raised or not?
The idea is to have it raised with a slope face curb. And so as opposed to a vertical curb, which is not as friendly to some tires of, say, trucks hitting it or cars hitting it, a slope face curb, the idea would be that could be a little friendlier and a little more forgiving. But the final decision on that, this is at the master plan stage, the final decision on that is still way off until you get into further design down the road. You can see the dotted line that delineates sort of that flush island that's there today. So, that might be a solution as well. But right now we're introducing the idea of having this as a raised island with a sloped face curb.
One other question from before was, are there plans to clean up the newspaper boxes in front of the post office?
Clean them up. One of the things that we've done on other streetscape projects, can't really get rid of them, is to make what I would guess call sort of a corral, if you will, basically a structure that sort of houses all of them. So it can be designed such to fit into the streetscape character, but allows them to still be in the sidewalk area at the post office, or I guess anywhere else that they might be, but we're talking about the post office now, so that they can be still there, but it doesn't look so haphazard in the way they're placed, and they're able to look a little more organized. We've done that on a couple of streetscape projects in the past.
There was a couple comments about, will the plan allow for providing a mail drop box?
That's been a question that has come up on, I think, in all three of the meetings as well. I think that that's something that we can look at. We're looking really at the roadway corridor. I don't know if we'd envision putting a drop box in on the roadway corridor, because it would be likely to be going against traffic. So, but I think that idea is something that has been carried forth through all of the meetings, and something that we'll be noting in the final report. That's something that needs further review and study.
There was one comment about, can the post office be rebuilt? And I don't know if you have control over that.
Yes, I guess I have to just punt on that question.
Yeah. Just remind folks please use the chat function rather than the Q&A function. It'll be easier for us to monitor that. Thank you.
So this is basically Waverly Street right before the intersection. Again, a relatively wide section of roadway. But what we're proposing is to extend the sidewalk on the right-hand side. You can see that little red mark that's sort of in the middle of the sidewalk on the right-hand side of this cross section. So we're expanding the sidewalk out a little bit on that side of the roadway. And this again is in an effort to help be able to make a better crosswalk scenario at the intersection. The other improvement that I think is worth pointing out is the current crosswalk is somewhere near where that red line is that goes across Waverly. And so by making these improvements, these proposed improvements, what we're hoping to do is have a more conventional crosswalk, which will in turn make it a much safer crosswalk as well. But so this is the way the cross section works approaching Main Street on Waverly. Here's what it looks like today. Here's what it could look like. Is under with utilities. And here's what it could look like under the without utilities scenario.
Randy, there's a question about how this will work with the improvements from Columbia Gas. The sidewalks and the road on Waverly are scheduled to be repaired this summer. Wouldn't it be more cost effective to do this all at once?
Yes, but funding for a streetscape project like this is not secured at this time. And so there's the balancing act between being able to utilize the funds from the Columbia Gas folks, but still look forward to the future to make some significant improvements to the downtown roadways and streetscape. So I know that that's one of the conversations that we'll be having as we come to the final stages of this part of the project, the master planning phase, what the extent is and what kind of funding sources there might be available. But that's something that is part of the consideration as well, is just to what extent the money from Columbia Gas is used downtown, roadways and sidewalks. And correct me if I missed anything on that, Gene or Andrew as well.
Yeah, and there was just a follow-up question about timeline and schedule for the improvements.
The streetscape improvements?
Yes.
That's a good question. I would say it's still a little ways off, only because we're at a very preliminary stage at this point. It's really hard to characterize. If there was a big pot of money that came along, it would go much quicker. That's not usually how it works. So I would suggest going through a continued design process, which would also have numerous opportunities for the public to have input on it. I would suggest that we're still a number of years, say 3 to 5 years off, if not a little more. So continuing towards Sutton, the roadway really starts to get really narrow in this area. And you can see, if you look closely, there aren't that many locations where the red dashed line is too different from the proposed curb line. The plans would be, as part of this, is to make significant improvements to the Sutton Street, Main Street intersection. That would include upgrading and modernizing the signal control at this intersection as well. One other idea is looking at, you can see where that red triangle is in the crosswalk, and then the walkway across the street from it that goes out to Sutton Pond. One idea is possibly making a trail that goes along the old railroad corridor at this location. The one thing that we're still trying to get our hands around is the ownership of what appears on the assessor plats as a right-of-way at this location, but it's not clear what the ownership is, so that certainly would have to be figured out before that particular concept could be moved forward. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those kinds of off-street connectivity in a few minutes. So here's what it looks like today, what it could look like, and without utilities. So now moving to the other side of Main Street, this would be over towards the Water and Main Street intersection. So the intersection area of Main and Water, it currently is a relatively wide road. Again, draw your attention to the red dashed line, and I'm looking at the red line that crosses the road to the left of the screen. And you can see the red dashed line is rather wide at this location, which doesn't make it a very friendly crosswalk for pedestrians to navigate, given the width and the amount of time that they're within the roadway area. And one of the ideas, if you remember, is to try to improve connections between the downtown and the Mills area. And so this became a real focal point of trying to make some significant pedestrian improvements in the, not only the crosswalk, but in the sidewalk areas as well. And to point out, the roadway travel lane widths throughout these areas that I'm going to review are also going to be 11 feet. So this is what it looks like looking towards the downtown along Main Street with Water Street to the right. As I go to the proposed image, keep your eyes on the crosswalk sign and the curb line where the crosswalk ends just to the left of it. So you can see we're making some narrowing to the roadway, shortening the crosswalk distance so that it can become much more pedestrian friendly. I'll toggle back and forth for a second on this. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is the brick banding, the idea of ornamental lights, the idea of introducing more street trees into the streetscape itself. It would also include ideas of locations for benches and pocket parks, bike racks and trash receptacles, and wayfinding signage, which I'm going to touch on towards the end of the presentation. So again, this is what it looks like currently. under the proposed condition with utilities and without.
And Randy, if I could add, this proposes parking spaces in front of Santander Bank as well that currently don't exist, correct?
That's correct. Thank you, Jean. Yeah, so by doing the narrowing, what we're able to do in this particular location is be able to define some parking spaces that don't currently exist.
Randy, there was a question about, will recycling composting bins as well as trash receptacles be provided?
They could, yeah. Quite often, at least having trash and recyclable bins together. And the idea of including composting bins could definitely be considered as part of the further design of the streetscape features.
There was another question about, the number of yellow crosswalk signs, at each crosswalk.
Well, I had mentioned that they, under a new plan, would be done according to the regulations. The Manual of Unified Traffic Control Devices, I believe it's called, which is really what prescribes the location for those kinds of regulatory signs. So that would need to be followed under a new design.
Right. And one more, Randy. Have there been issues for pedestrians or pedestrian crashes or accidents leading to design proposals?
There have, when we did our counts, we did pedestrian counts, bicyclist counts, as well as vehicular counts. And if I'm remembering correctly, there has been an accident in the downtown, including a pedestrian. So one of the things that we're trying to do is make the atmosphere a little more conducive for the pedestrians and safer for pedestrians as well.
Yeah, I think we recorded 2 pedestrian crashes with vehicles, one in Water and one between School Street and 2nd Street.
Okay.
And there's a question of the crosswalks. It's great to be shorter and safer. And I'll just make the comment that, we're trying to, present a kind of a gateway and show the character to drivers that this is an area where you really need to slow down. There'll be a lot of pedestrian crossings. So really change the behavior of the driver, not so much volumes, but to slow traffic down to be safer.
Yeah, if I would just I would quickly add from the town's perspective, I mean, I would also look at it from an economic development perspective as well. I think the goal here is to maybe encourage more pedestrian activity, safe pedestrian activity, which hopefully helps in terms of to the extent that, existing businesses can benefit from that pedestrian activity, that would be great. And maybe it'll invite more businesses to invest in the downtown. So hopefully it's an economic development driver as well in the long run.
Yeah, and let me just add on to what Andrew just said is, of the many streetscape projects that we've done, not only design, but also bringing them to construction. One of the things that we noticed right away is sort of a reinvigoration of the downtown areas. There's really sort of a building upon the capital that was spent to upgrade the road and the sidewalk that the business owners and just about every single one of the streetscape projects that I've worked on really feel sort of empowered to do. And I think the other part about that that's important to mention is that, when we're looking at this particular streetscape project, one of the things, and I'm just going to mention it, is we're basically trying to create that downtown feel that is not just defined by the buildings and the parking spaces that you currently have out there, but by the street trees, the ornamental lights, the use of the sidewalk treatments with the brick banding and the crosswalk treatments, all really to send a visual cue as well as a physical cue that this is a downtown area. So for instance, the slide that you have in front of you right now, you can see that we're still proposing the brick banding on the sidewalks, at least on the church side. We're proposing the ornamental lights as well, street trees, really to send a signal for people who are coming from the south and heading into the downtown that they're entering a different place, and a place that is very much a place where the pedestrians and the vehicles need to be able to share the space that they have so that everybody can feel safe and be able to still facilitate using all of those kinds of corridors, whether you're a vehicle or a pedestrian or a bicyclist as well. And so the neck down that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, which is next to that red line that goes across the road, is you currently have a neck down there, but you can see through the red dashes compared to the proposed lines. We're really trying to make that something a little bit more substantial, not only to help facilitate the crossing between one side of the street to the other, but also to be almost, as Jeff said, like a gateway, is to be able to start sending that message and really starting to send visual cues that you're entering a different roadway character. So this is the area in front of St. Michael's. There is some narrowing proposed, as you can see, but we're also trying to maintain some of the roadway characteristics that are out there with the grass strip that's across the street from the St. Michael's that we're trying to maintain, where the sidewalk pulls away from the roadway edge and allows for that grass strip. Is something that is acting as a transition, if you will, between the downtown character and the street character, which is to the south of downtown, where you do have the sidewalks sort of moving between right at the edge of the curb line or away from the curb line and having a grass strip in between the roadway and the sidewalk.
Randy, let me ask just a couple more. Shouldn't the crosswalk manual be considered when designing crosswalks?
I don't know, Jeff, can you answer that one?
Well, we follow all state and industry standards. So there are standards we need to follow with ADA, of course. There is some flexibility with the materials for the crosswalk itself, but it has to be visible at night. And the spacing standards, we want to make sure that they make sense and not too close to one another or too far apart. And really the desire where people want to cross. So the manual on uniform traffic control devices is one of those, but we also follow state standards and the industry practice for all those. And really the thing is to make the crossing safe. That's number one thing. The materials and all that to make it look nice. That's great for the downtown, but the number one factor is safety. One other question, Randy, was could street lights be run by solar power?
Yeah, they can. I think that there's been a lot of advances in solar power for lighting. The one thing that I think they're still working on is being able to have something where I've seen lights that have solar panels on them. They're not the most attractive thing. One of the things that I've also worked on, this is more so in parking lots, is being able to have a place within the parking lot area that's sort of that, those in-between spaces at the ends of islands or runs, I should say, of parking, is being able to put in some photo cells there. This being sort of a spread out project makes it a little more difficult, but I think as technology improves, I think we're going to start to see those kinds of things become much more commonplace.
And there's one question about removing this. I think there's some removing the straight line for curbs. I think that may be talking about granite curbs to more curved curbing when snow plowing and removal has to be done.
Yeah, I think maybe what you're talking about is the way that the parking spaces, and I'll use this image on the screen now to describe it, but is that to facilitate plowing, they're able to have the line of the curb not be sort of a right angle, but be sort of a curved line in where the plow could be able to follow the curb into the parking bay. And then as you're coming out, and I'm looking on the parking area across from the church right now, that when you're coming out of that parking bay, instead of a right angle, it's a curved line so that it facilitates the ability to completely clear that parking lane of snow. So that, I hope I answered your question with that.
Jeff, if I could just circle back to the question regarding, have there been issues for pedestrians, in essence, accidents? At the first public meeting, we heard from many people in terms of trip hazards from the existing brick sidewalks, especially in front of the post office and Dunkin' Donuts, but also across from Town Hall running down towards the Panadosi Insurance Agency. They're really uneven, and people felt essentially they weren't really in a safe condition. So in addition to the comments made before, certainly heard that just a safety issue in terms of pedestrians walking on these brick sidewalks.
Right, right.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I'm going to give you an image of what this area could look like. This again is in front of St. Michael's Church. Current condition. Proposed condition. Again, you can see some narrowing that's taking place. But in this area, the grass strip on the left-hand side is being able to be maintained. And we're able to narrow the road a little bit on the church side to be able to find a place for the ornamental lights, the street trees, and the brick banding along the curb line. Here's what it looks like without utilities. All right, I'm going to move along to Water Street. So here's the Main and Water Street intersection to the left of the screen. Again, I'll draw your attention to the red dashed line, primarily up closer to the Main Street intersection. And you can see that we're increasing the sidewalk width, generally speaking, on both sides of the roadway. This is one of the critical areas in trying to make some significant improvements between the Mills area and the downtown, and trying to create as best as possible a really inviting place, sidewalk place for pedestrians to feel comfortable in. And when I show you the existing condition photograph, there's a couple of challenges here. Actually, this image really depicts one of them, is the number of curb cuts, and that's not going to change, but that is something that is a little intimidating to some pedestrians. So we wanted to be able to make a clear line, a clear path, and the brick banding helps to do that, and the street trees and ornamental lights do as well. One of the proposals that's different from the existing condition that's illustrated on this plan is we're looking at the proposed parking being across the street from the residence and on the church side. One of the reasons for doing that is under the scenario of narrowing the roadway and increasing the sidewalk width, we can get more spaces between the two streets, Main Street and Merrimack, by doing that. So right now, if you were to look at the number of spaces on the residential side, we're able to, on the church side, get upwards of maybe 3 to 4 additional parking spaces. Now, when you do a count comparison, that would be a comparison of what would be sort of legal parking spaces. Right now, I'm guessing that between each of the curb cuts of those residents on the opposite side from the church, I would guess that people are parking 2 cars within that zone. But those lengths of curb range between 22 to 23 feet, upwards of maybe 28 to 29 feet. And that would really, once it would be designed, would be only space for 1 parking. So this really does help us to increase the number of parking spaces within this section of roadway, as well as be able to make some significant improvements to the sidewalk area and the pedestrian experience.
Randy, is a comment about St. Michael's Church. Does St. Michael's realize the proposed plan is parking in front of the church? This is often used for church services and funerals.
I can't respond either way, knowing whether they've seen the proposal or not. I don't know, but certainly The idea behind what we're trying to do is to make sure as many people as possible hear about this. And as I was saying earlier, that this is really the first of many steps where there will be public engagement. But if people know folks from St. Michael's or people who live along Water Street, we would love to hear from them so that we can have their input at this stage of the project.
And a couple more. Would it be safe to assume that residential curb cuts for driveways would be designed as continuous walkways with transitions at the driveways rather than actual cuts in the curb?
Well, there would be actual cuts in the curb, but I think your point is that the sidewalk surface between the curb cuts and where there are those curb cuts would be a relatively continuous sidewalk surface without sort of dipping down into the part, the pull-in for the parking and then going back up for the other side of that curb cut. So yes, that would be the intent.
And I think we touched on this about bike lanes. Will exclusive bike lanes be part of the plan?
Exclusive, no. I mean, this would be a really narrow corridor to be able to incorporate exclusive. The roadway width, well, I go to that right now. The roadway width here is from curb to curb, a little bit bigger than 30 feet. So the existing width is almost 34 feet. And if you remember correctly, the existing width in front of Main Street was about 48 feet. And that was a challenge to be able to maintain as many on-street parking spaces as possible, as well as being able to accommodate vehicles and pedestrians. It's a little bit even, here it's even more challenging. But I think that one of the concepts that I'm going to review with you in a few minutes about other opportunities for connectivity might provide an alternative for bicyclists from taking this particular roadway corridor. But really, just to answer your question in not as long-winded of a way as I just did, it's a challenge to be able to get the exclusive bike lanes in this location. And what we're really trying to do is find that balancing act between making sure all users are accommodated. So in this cross section that you see on the screen, you can see the red marks that are within the sidewalk areas, either side of the roadway. That's the current width of the roadway. You can see that we're really trying to make some improvements to the width of the sidewalk. Again, I said that this was a relatively critical component or a critical location for making pedestrian improvements to provide for a friendly and inviting space for the pedestrian to be able to walk between the downtown and the Mills district or the Mills area. With the number of residents that are living in that Mills area, making it a much more walkable community is really a primary goal of the project, and making this this corridor as pedestrian friendly as possible is something that's an important part of the overall project. So what does it look like? This is here we have today. And I had mentioned the sort of the unfriendly nature of this particular part of the downtown or this roadway corridor. You do have those numerous curb cuts on the other side. You have a relatively narrow sidewalk on the church side, and in some places you can see that retaining wall, which makes the sidewalk feel even that much more narrower. You really feel confined. And so what we're trying to do is make this as inviting a space as possible. So here you can see the, I'm going to toggle back and forth and look at the sidewalk in front of the house on the left, or look at the curb line. So there it is as it exists today. Under the proposed conditions, we're widening the sidewalk. Part of that will be turned over to a widened area for pedestrians, but another part of it will be turned over to streetscape elements such as the brick band, the ornamental lighting, and the street trees to really make this much more inviting. And we're also able to widen the sidewalk on the other side, the church side as well. Here's what it looks like without utilities. So I'm gonna just toggle through it one more time. So continuing on towards the High Street intersection. Again, we're bringing all the streetscape features, that character down to the this part of the project area, High Street at the Mills. The other thing that this concept envisions is changing the intersection from a three-way stop to a four-way stop. One of the things that we're looking at again is trying to find that balance point between pedestrians and vehicles and really trying to make this as safe of an intersection for pedestrians as possible. The other thing to note, and I'm going to touch on this again in a few minutes, is not only is this another area of retail and residential living, but there's also the Mills to Hill Trail, which is the sidewalk that runs along the mill that's to the upper right quadrant of the image and then continues on out to the hills. We are also making some minor roadway narrowing here. Again, the red dash under the word High Street, or to the left of the word High Street, but also making some neck downs along the Water Street side of the intersection as well to shorten the crosswalk distance that the pedestrians have. You'll notice that there are the same lights, ornamental lights and trees that are seen elsewhere. And then as you're heading High Street to the bottom of the screen, again, trying to make that transition to a more residential feel when we change the sidewalk relationship where we can to provide a grass strip to help make that visual cue and visual transition. Here's what it looks like today. Here's the proposed conditions. I don't have a without utilities image because there aren't utilities at this particular location, but I'll toggle back and forth between the two. You can see the sidewalk getting a little wider. So continuing on High Street for a bit. Again, trying to link the two areas as best as possible, utilizing the same language, if you will, of the streetscape character in the brick band, ornamental lights, and also street trees. And this would continue along High Street and up to the intersection. And even though this slide says Water Street, it really isn't Water Street. Sorry about that. I just noticed that. So I had mentioned through the course of the presentation so far, some alternative ways to get connectivity to the downtown. And this is a slide we had at the last meeting, and there are some revisions that I want to speak to. But in the area of Osgood Pond, which is to the middle of the screen, one idea is to incorporate a boardwalk that would go over Osgood Pond and connect between the Mills area to the right and over towards where the town hall parking lot is to the left. And so you can see the bolder green dashed lines at either end of the proposed boardwalk that makes the connections on the town hall side to both the parking lot behind the town hall as well as out to Main Street, and then on the Mill side through the parking lot area and in over to High Street. This would be, as I mentioned when we were looking at the Water Street concept, an idea of an alternative way to incorporate and facilitate pedestrians as well as bicyclists along this part of the project. And then I had mentioned sort of earlier in the presentation at the northern end of Main Street towards Sutton Street, the idea of having a pedestrian bike connection that goes along from Main Street over to Sutton Pond, and with the bridge crosses Sutton Pond itself along the old railroad corridor. And if you were to go out there today, you'll see a number of piers and columns of where the old trestle used to be that crossed Sutton Pond, and then continuing the access, the trail, a potential connection over towards the mills, and being able to provide pedestrian and bicyclist connection in a couple of different locations that helps to be able to take the neighbors to the east and give them an alternative connection to the downtown, as well as the developments that are taking place and have taken place between the mill and the future possible development of Avalon in the project area. And to sort of just put a point on that, the center of that circle is Town Hall. The darker grayish color that is concentric circle around that is about a 5-minute walk or a quarter mile from Town Hall. So you can see that a good chunk of the downtown is within a quarter mile of the Town Hall area, which is a relatively reasonable walking distance. And a half mile is the next circle out. That's about a 10-minute walk that an average pedestrian would have. And I think one of the things that is kind of important to illustrate from an economic development, walkability, and using the downtown businesses and really trying to promote downtown business. Quarter mile would be if you were to go to the malls during the holiday seasons and couldn't find a parking space close to the door, but found yourself really out on the extremes of the parking lot, not even the extremes, say towards more than halfway out, that's probably about the same distance from your car to the store, the doors of the mall, which is not even to the stores, it's just to the door of the mall. And it's an interesting way to think about it, because when we get to a mall, we don't generally think about the walk too much. Most people try to find the parking space closest to the doors, but oftentimes we don't consider just how much walking we actually do when we're at a mall. And so one of the things that I wanted to use this slide to illustrate, and to sort of Andrew's point earlier about trying to make this a renewed experience and a renewed way for businesses to thrive in the downtown, is that there is a very walkable, dense downtown area that parking your car once and parking it either on street or parking it in the town hall parking lot, it really is a very easy walk to go from store to store, and isn't really anything different than what you might do if you were spending some time at the malls.
Hey, Randy, a question came in. Could the walking trail be developed prior to the work on the road and sidewalks?
It possibly could, yeah. I mean, they don't come without their own challenges. I'm gonna go back to this map. Features such as the bridge or the boardwalk in and of themselves are relatively expensive features. They also have the added hurdle of regulatory agencies and the review and permitting process that goes along with them. So those ideas probably, though they could be done ahead of time, they still have their own hurdles. But we wanted to make sure that we presented these kind of options, not as either or approach, but complementary approach. And the possibility of one or the other going first is certainly a reasonable way to look at it. So one of the other things that we have been looking at is not only how to make improvements sort of within the project area, but is to make improvements to signage so that you can get visitors and people who are destined for the downtown to the downtown in a way that is relatively easy and straightforward to find. Coming off of 495, except for the interchange that's just off to the bottom left of the screen, you have some distance to get from 495 to the downtown. And so wayfinding is one way to make, a wayfinding program is one way to make that easier for people who are making that journey to the downtown that may not be necessarily familiar with the downtown, but are wanting to get there. And this is sort of a way to look at the future as well, is building upon making improvements to the public right-of-way area, hoping that there'll be improvements that the private folks make that creates a bit of a buzz that draws people, more people to the downtown, is to make sure we can give them a program of signage that gives them a way to get there. So one of the things that we've done projects on is wayfinding for communities. And this wayfinding concept plan looks at having directional signage for getting you off of the 495, but also anticipating people coming from other locations outside of the downtown and wanting to make their way to the downtown. And so having a signage system such as this really can start to give people, in a very discreet way, not a lot of signs, the ability to not only utilize these wayfinding signs, but because of their distinct character, color, our design type, be able to pick that up and really be able to use that as a way to get from point A to point B. And parking being one of the more important parts of it is making sure we really try to play that up as well. So we're drawing to an end. Happy to answer any more questions.
Yep, let me ask another one, Randy. Going back to the trails, does the town have any ownership or easement for the abandoned rail right-of-way?
Well, as I said, the section that is over towards the left of this image, that goes from Main Street to the proposed bridge, it shows up on the assessor map as an old railroad right-of-way, but there's no definition. And what I mean by that is, if you looked at whether or not it's got a plat or lot number, it doesn't have one. So it's right, this time we're still trying to figure out the ownership of that. As you go across this is, the ownership is, in some places, it could be part of the property adjacent to it, or it could be part of a standalone right-of-way. So that the trail envisions cooperation, whether it's within the old right-of-way or over by the Mills area, of the property owners to be able to move the concept forward.
I think we've gotten to most of the questions. Some of the statements, we didn't respond to the statements, but I'll say we have everything that you've put in the chat, or in Q&A for that matter. We have a record of that. So we'll be reviewing all your comments. And if we missed something or responding to you, don't worry. We'll be looking at the the minutes and the record of this meeting.
And keep in mind that this will be on the town's website. So if you know somebody that wasn't attending that wanted to attend, by all means, go to the town website and take a look. You can also send some messages to us on that. I'm going to go to the last slide because I think this is important in context to getting your input. Based on that input, we're going to refine these, the design plan. We'll be having a meeting with the selectmen at some point, but probably sometime in April, yet to be scheduled. We are hoping to complete the master plan by the end of April. And what that means is that that plan will be a summary of the meetings that we've had, the input that we've received, and a series of recommendations that then can be taken to the next step. Those recommendations will also talk about project costs, and it will talk about potential funding. and give some ideas on how you can start to implement the concepts that the master plan show.
One more
Jeff,
question.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. If you could entertain the one additional question, I think that's an important one.
Yeah, so another question, Randy, about they like the trees, but wondering about measures that prevent the roots, from cracking and creating bumps in the sidewalk.
There's a number of things. The first thing is the selection of the trees and trying to select those trees that are not naturally aggressively shallow rooted trees. That would be the first. The second, oftentimes the trees roots are within that area between the sidewalk and the soil, because the soil is so compacted that it's very difficult for the tree roots to get into it. And so there are a number of different approaches that have been used that are relatively new. And when I mean new, they're probably like the last 15 to 20 years. But it's the soil that you propose underneath the sidewalks that help facilitate the ability of the roots to get into that soil and not have to find alternative paths to in the growth. And the other part about that is really being able to make sure that when you're looking at the sidewalk areas around the trees, that you might look at thickened sections of sidewalk area to help strengthen the sidewalk. And it's also one of the realizations is that that area that the tree is within, sort of I'll call that the planting rectangle, is enough to accommodate that if the trees are doing well, which we want them to do, that that area where the tree comes in, goes into the ground, where you tend to see the tree trunk expanding, has room to expand without having the constriction of a sidewalk up against it, so that as it does expand, it's pushing soil and it's not pushing concrete sidewalks. And so that handful of approaches would be things that we would be looking at to make sure that the trees are healthy and the sidewalks don't have that kind of impact that does tend to happen.
One more, Randy. Any considerations of planters in addition to trees?
Sure. One of the things that we'll be looking for, and there are a couple of locations on the plan, the town hall side plan view that we first looked at being one of them, is looking at maybe expanding upon the improved areas, those planting areas that are at the back of sidewalk, and make them a little bigger within the newfound area with planters to increase the amount of enhancements that are in the downtown area. But certainly other locations, the intersection of the Waverly and Main Street is an intersection that comes up with a opportunity to provide some planting and enhancements. And so those kinds of things would be looked at in further detail as we really start to parse out the design in a much more finer grain. Other questions?
That's all we have for questions.
Well, I thank everybody for joining us. Appreciate your input. It's an important part of a project like this. And as I said, there'll be certainly other opportunities as things move forward. Again, please visit the website, drop a line with any questions that you have. And we appreciate you joining us on a Monday evening in March. Thank you.
All right, stand by. Can you stop presenting? Thank you. People are trailing off.
Andrew P., you're doing your thing.
And attendees are off.
Okay, so no attendees can hear us right now, right? Just confirming.